Well, very different messages for different verdicts, right? If he is found guilty, the message will be this is a corruption of the system of justice. This is a case brought by my general election opponent deliberately to upend my presidential campaign. He'll be going back to the well of victimhood that we've seen him do time and time again, and quite effectively, frankly. If there is a hung jury or if there is an outright acquittal, you can expect Trump to say complete exoneration. He will say the system of justice worked. Suddenly it's totally in reverse. And that despite the best efforts of his opponent, in this case, Joe Biden, he has emerged victorious. So those are the two expectations for how he plays it. Obviously, a lot more complications if he does get a guilty verdict in the end.
Tasha, how is the Trump campaign preparing?
Well, to Sam's point, the messaging is a big factor here, right? We don't know which way this is going to go, but we've already seen him starting to lay the groundwork. We just received a fundraising email from the Trump team asking for 1 million responses by midnight to the question, would you vote for me if I'm arrested? Of course, that arraignment process has already happened, but the sentiment is, will you stand by me no matter what? Because we have seen in polling some voters start to change their minds if there is a conviction in this case. So they're trying to dispel that narrative. The other piece of this here, Jose, is the physical, practical element of campaigning, right? His staff has been preparing for this trial to be over, to get more of his time, to get him out on the road, to deliver this message, whatever it is, whether it's I've been convicted and this is completely unfair or I've been vindicated. They are planning to go pedal to the metal at this point and use and make up for the time that he's been spending in the courtroom, Jose.
Glad everyone is expecting that the defense will go right after Cohen. You wrote in a piece.
Thank you. We talk about appeal. Of course, that presumes if there was a guilty verdict, that's the only way in which Trump would appeal. But the New York Appellate Court has ruled against Trump on the gag order. They've ruled against Trump on moving venue. So ultimately, you really got to take a long look at that constitutional Sixth Amendment question, and that would be a federal court claim.
And you I think we've seen demonstrated in the federal courts and certainly at the Supreme Court level, them cleaning up the mess made by the self-aggrandizing and clearly self-motivated lower courts. I anticipate that happening here. The judge has one final chance to actually correct essentially all the erroneous behavior that's been done in the reversible error that we've seen through and through, which is the jury instruction.
Maurice and Christine, in many respects, this is uncharted territory. The only presidential candidate to run from prison was socialist Eugene Debs, though he did get 1 million votes without ever setting foot on the campaign trail. And while it's unclear what Trump's sentence would be if he's found guilty, the specter of a possible conviction is raising all kinds of questions, legal and political. If he's convicted, can Donald Trump vote for himself for president? It was just one of the many questions legal and political experts wrestled with as former President Donald Trump's hush money trial kicked off in a Manhattan courtroom. J.C. Polanco is a lawyer and political expert.
Well, remember, he's a registered voter in Florida, and as of now, the answer is no.
Absolutely no?
No.
Seems it's a penalty Trump faces for switching his voting address from New York, where he lived most of his life, to his Palm Beach golf course, Mar-a-Lago. Florida law says a convicted felon can't regain the right to vote until he has served his time and paid any fines, which he probably would not be able to do before the election. New York is apparently more lenient.
In New York State, he would still be allowed to vote. If he were serving a sentence, he would not be able to vote while serving that sentence.
But a conviction would not prevent him from running for president.
The United
According
States
to the
and conspiracy against rights, meaning Trump is accused of stopping people from exercising their right to vote. The judge explaining to Trump he could face more than 50 years in prison if convicted on all 4 counts. Trump was released on conditions including not communicating facts about the case to anyone Trump knows to be a witness unless through counsel or with counsel present. He spoke on the tarmac at a D.C. area airport before heading back to his New Jersey estate.
This is a persecution of a political opponent.
If convicted in the hush money trial, former President Donald Trump could potentially face the following: up to 4 years in prison for each of the 34 felony counts of falsifying business records he is charged with. However, legal experts suggest jail time is unlikely, given his first-time offender status and the nonviolent nature of the charges. More likely sentences could include fines up to $5,000 per count, probation, community service, or a conditional discharge. The severity would depend on the number of counts he is convicted of, with more counts potentially leading to harsher punishment. If sentenced to less than a year in jail, Trump would likely serve his time in a city jail like Rikers Island, held in a closed-off area for his protection. He would be eligible for parole after serving 2/3 of the sentence. The judge has discretion in determining the sentence, which could range from just probation for a single count to potentially 30 days in jail and 3 years probation if convicted on multiple counts, according to former Judge George Grasso. So while the charges carry potential multi-year prison sentences, most legal experts cited in the results view actual jail time as improbable for Trump if convicted, with fines and probation being more likely outcomes, especially if he receives a lenient sentence as a first-time offender.
Was those 34 counts, those 34 felonies that the former president has been hit with. Now, those 34 counts, they all pertain to falsifying business records in the first degree. Mr. Trump speaking on his own behalf, entering a not guilty plea. Now, normally arraignments can only take a few minutes, but Mr. Trump took just under an hour, and there were no cameras allowed inside the courtroom. But what we can tell you is that it was a surreal scene of a former president under arrest going before a judge to enter his not guilty plea. His motorcade left his Trump Tower home at 1:10 and arrived by about 1:30 to the DA's office in the courthouse, which is part of the same complex. Now, while he was fingerprinted, he was not handcuffed and did not have his mugshot taken. Now, those in the courtroom, which was filled to maximum capacity with about 100 people, described Mr. Trump as being visibly annoyed and angry. With the indictment now unsealed, we have more information on what the former president is being charged with. Prosecutors are accusing Mr. Trump of a broader scheme to buy and suppress negative stories about him in order to boost his chances of winning the 2016 election. The payoffs not only to Stormy Daniels, but to 2 other people who had information potentially damaging to his reputation. But here's the part that would make it a felony. Prosecutors say Trump made 34 false entries in business records to conceal the criminal activity, violating state and federal election laws.
At its core, this case today is one with allegations like so many of our white-collar cases. Allegations that someone lied again and again to protect their interests and evade the laws to which we are all held accountable.
This man's name was not Donald J. Trump. There is no scenario we'd all be here today. Please understand that based on these charges.
These jury instructions matter a lot. They might matter more than closing arguments, which are a big deal, and of course we'll be covering. That's the last thing the jury hears on the substance. But the last thing the jury hears on the rules matters a lot. It comes from the judge. It has that authority. They're read out. And the lawyers here are clashing about exactly what goes in those instructions. And all of this will go to guide how this jury considers what Trump knew and what he intended. I've told you this as fair as I can. Part of the allegations here, part of the crimes, have effectively been proven, by which I mean when you have the paperwork and it's lying and you have Donald Trump's signature on it, you've proven the basic element of the fraud. That is, this stuff isn't what they said it was, and they lied about it. And you have Cohen and paperwork showing that. But that is not the whole case, as you've heard, and you need to have Trump's intent on that, as well as the secondary issue, the second thing about this campaign crime. Now, Trump's lawyers wanted to take all of this, what I just referred to in simple form, and try to make it even more complex with a higher kind of burden than the law might require. At times, they were basically asking for special treatment. And I've told you, they have the right to make these requests. The judge has been through this rodeo before, and he's in charge, and he can just say, no, that's a ridiculous request. They did make some ground on some issues, but when they asked the judge to consider the extraordinarily important nature of the case, basically the, hey, our defendant was president defense, the judge said, I'm not going to change the law. I'm not going to do that. In other words, you can't just say, hey, this guy's important in some generalized sense. Remember, no one's above the law. Now, Trump had also been seen dozing off in court throughout the course of this trial, which is a contrast to how he was during these jury instruction arguments. Again, sometimes Donald Trump in politics and in court, he plays a more disengaged or more aloof person than he actually is. Remember, he's a reality show star. He's an actor in many ways. And suddenly we saw that he could perk up and pay a lot of attention. There was no napping during the debate over the jury instructions, which suggests that this defendant knows exactly how important they are. Now, as I mentioned, on Tuesday, the jury hears the closing arguments, and the judge has told the jurors they may have to stay late, with the idea being that you can see the timeline here, that in fairness to everybody, you set aside enough time here after the break. Everyone can go, rest up and all that, just like they're human beings. But then the jury sits down, and according to the judge, he's hoping to have them all hear these arguments, perhaps finish them on Tuesday, and then turn to deliberations on Wednesday. And if you thought this thing wasn't transparent without cameras in the courtroom during the trial, well, jury deliberations are, of course, secret completely. So hour by hour, we will know nothing about what they're doing, what the vote might be, what they're thinking, what the debates are, unless and until they submit questions that can be read out to the judge in court, ask for evidence, or announce their decision. We don't know how long the deliberations will take. We don't even know which parts of this case will matter most to the jury. There are some big things that we think will matter. Stormy Daniels, for example, testifying about something that Trump says through his lawyers never happened is a big deal. Her lawyer is coming up in this special, which I think could be interesting to hear from. Michael Cohen, both what he said, basically eyewitness to the crime, and then what he was attacked on. But does he tell the truth? Those are the kind of things we could infer the jury will care about, but we don't know. And I say that not as an exercise, not as observation, but as the actual humility of our justice system when it is supposed to work. We are not supposed to know in advance or from the outside. We can watch, we can observe, we can report. But it is what happens inside among those jury members, a jury of your peers. That's all that matters in this courtroom in the week ahead.